Beautiful. So we've got our little blue wren, and I've drawn a border for myself, and this is what I'm going to work into with my INKtense pencils and my water. So a little bit of pre-planning. I'm going to attempt to keep this area white, and then I'm going to do a wet in wet border for the outside. So I'll show you two different techniques there. With working on the calico, if you want white, it's a matter of leaving the fabric unpainted. The same when you're doing watercolor paintings, white is leaving the paper untouched. Okay, I'm going to start with the little birdie because he is the main feature. So I'm going to find my beautiful blue, and I'm going to work this shape being sympathetic to the feathers, let's say, right? I'm not going to colour across because the feathers are long tail feathers. And I'm going to press fairly hard to get some good colour on there. Okay, I'm going to use that same blue through here. So this is the iris blue, and that section comes down here and on his little head. Now the blue wren is native to Australia. He is very, very small. Okay, I'm just going to start with the straight out blue, and then I'm going to add some variation in a little minute. So here we go, working that colour. Now I trace my design with the friction pen, and that will completely iron away later on. Right the way down to here. Okay. Now that's looking pretty flat to me. It's just almost plain blue. So what we want to do is get some variation in there. I've got my violet, and I'm just adding 3 little strokes like that, and then helping those move. And we've just darkened that bit, and I might just do the same up here, just to help identify those sort of long tail feathers that the blue wren has. Okay, and now on his body here, so you can see when I've touched the purple onto those wet areas, a lot of pigment goes on there. So I need to work it with the brush just to make it move that little bit, help it move. And now it's that gradual change. Looking back over here, I might decide that that needs to be a teeny bit darker. Now you could hit that with a hairdryer to speed the process up if you're impatient like me, but let's have a go at this consistent random activity. Okay, so I'm not going to try and paint right next to him. I'm going to go somewhere else. Okay, so I do want the leaves to be some kind of a green, so I'm looking for a couple of different greens to use. So you can see you do not have to colour in the entire piece. And again, I'm using the pencil, making marks that are sympathetic to the object. So for a leaf, you know, that's kind of the direction that a leaf grows in, let's say. Okay, lovely variations. This is what we love about hand-dyed fabrics, is that slight variation. The fact that that can blend from one colour to the other and just give us tonal changes, not just flat green. If you want just flat green, go and buy flat green fabric and just applique it on. Why not have these beautiful little variations? So the water is to activate the colour and to determine the outer edge of that shape. So you can see I'm using that brush to push out the moisture to the edge of that shape, and then leaving it be, knowing that those two colours are going to kind of mix and do things, make some magic and give me some beautiful variations to those green leaves. Now, like with any paint, these colours will dry lighter. So sometimes you might look at this and think, oh, I've gone really, really strong green. It will dry that little bit lighter. The other thing you can do while it is wet is you absolutely could get some paper towel and dab it off, and you will remove some colour while it is wet. So I'm quite happy with those leaves. I'm going to leave them to dry. And I think what I'll do now is show you how I'm going to do that border, because I have to let that to dry and I will get back to it later. But let's have a look at this border. When I'm doing all these areas, I'm going to paint fairly carefully right up to those lines. I'm then going to try very hard to keep all that section unpainted, untouched by water. If the water from here escaped into there, like if my brush accidentally went like that with the water, the colour would go in there. So I have to be quite careful to try and not let the water move into that section. That's the other thing to be aware of, is if you move this, what's underneath there could be moisture and you might move into that puddle. Just be careful about moving the job. So with this square brush, I'm going to run the side of the brush down that line. But I'm running that water carefully down that line and then spreading it out so that it goes past that border, so I know I'll get plenty of colour out into the border. But I'm being very careful at that point there. Now with a little bit of time, you'll see this slightly change colour. So I'm going to continue doing this around the whole border, running that brush very carefully along that edge. Not too much water, it just has to be damp through, not soggy and soaking wet, just damp through. So I'm being very careful down that line, down that border. Don't worry about the friction pen, that will completely iron off later, even if we have painted over it. Okay, it's a heat activated pen, it'll be gone. So I'm now just looking at the wetness. I can see it, it's changed colour of my fabric. So now I'm going to choose some colours. I don't know what I'm going to paint the rest of my bird. So ideally what you would do is wait until you've painted this whole piece, and then you'd sort of know, well, what colour do I want the border to be? Remember, it looks very intense at first. And then we want to move that colour. Might transition to some orange down here. How quick and easy is this? It is quite liberating scribbling on your work, knowing that it's going to come out beautifully. See how this is obviously shrinking and the middle's getting a bit puckery. That's okay, it'll all iron out later on. So I'm going to bring the green in here, so we're transitioning from the yellow to a green. Oh, see that? There's a thread. Hopefully that'll kind of disappear when I wet the whole thing. Blend those colours. There we go, looking good. Right, this is where you've got to be patient. We now have to wait for that to dry. And then I can leave that white and then come back in here. So my plan was this was going to be yellow, so I'm just going to do it very carefully without touching that area there. So if I come in here with my yellow, make sure that paintbrush is clean, because if it had dark blue on it, you're now going to be adding dark blue. So here we go. If I paint very carefully near that edge but don't touch that edge, I'm going to just leave a teeny little gap and hope that I've been nice and careful and no yellow will go into that area. If that was completely dry, I could completely paint the yellow right up to that edge and it would not go in there. It would not bleed or blend or do anything. Moisture equals movement. Once it is dry, it can't go anywhere. Okay, so I just want to show you something else that we can do here. I've grabbed a tissue. I otherwise would use paper towel. But if this was, let's say way stronger than you wanted it to be, while it is still wet, you can actually take off some of that colour. So I am going to leave that to dry and come back in a little while. So here we are back at our little project, and it is completely dry. I've left it for quite a while. So the drying time really depends on where you live. Where I am in the capital of Australia, in Canberra, we have very dry air, so it does dry quickly. So it really depends on where you live. But how you can tell is if you touch it with the side of your hand there, you'll just kind of feel if it's cold, and if it's cold, it's still wet. And you can see how this area has shrunk, making that area kind of pucker. But by the time we paint the whole area, it's not going to be a problem. Ideally, yes, I'd like to iron it, which you could do at this point, except that friction pen will iron away. So now what I want to demonstrate is the fact that when this is dry, I can paint right up to it, in fact touch that, and this cannot move, because if this is dry, the wet colour just sees this as dry fabric. So my first thought is to dive in here with some pink or something, but I want to make sure that whatever colour I put behind the bird obviously isn't going to be blue. So I'm going to take that colour up there because I want this to look like this is on top. And you can see I'm not being very careful. I'm not colouring every area. I'm just applying some pigment to the fabric, ready for the water to move it. I think that's the mistake some people make, is thinking that they have to colour in every square inch. Well, you don't. You just have to get some pigment on there, ready to then move it around with the water. And this is where I prefer to have a blunt pencil, because if this was a sharp point, I would get more of these distinct hard lines. But the fact that it's blunt, I'm getting a large flat surface of that pencil, so I'm not getting those harsh colouring lines. Right, looking for my brush. Let's have a little play here. So I could actually just paint right the way over that little stem there, which would be much easier than painting around it, because I'm probably just going to paint it brown later on, and if I put a brownish colour over the orangish colour, that's going to work fine. It's just going to make a darker brown. The only bit I'm being careful about is that edge there. I want that to be a clean, crisp edge, because the idea of this is that the background looks like pieced fabric, that you've made a block first and then we've appliqued our bird on top. That's kind of the look. Now you can probably see there looks to be a little bit of bleed there. That is not actually bleeding. That is where my brush went over the edge of that yellow and it has taken some of that pink there. The pink does not know the yellow's there. The yellow does not know the pink's there. So the pink is going to be overlapping on the yellow at that point because I didn't paint very accurately. That is not bleeding. That is poor brush control. Okay? So if I come along here now, I'm going to deliberately take that pink in to smooth that line out, and then when the friction pen is gone, it'll just be a smooth circular line. If it was bleeding, you'd have all this green going out there and all this pink going in here. The whole thing would be doing that, and it's not, okay? Now, of course, if I touch the wetness here onto that little patch there, it will bleed, so I'm going to be quite careful. This is the bark, a very dark chocolate brown, and while that is wet, I'm going to come in here with feathery strokes. That is bleeding because that base was wet, so I'm going to just help it a little bit, but otherwise I'm going to let those feathery shapes stay there, and they will soften because I worked that pencil onto a damp area. Again, just laying on some pigment, not trying to colour the entire thing. There we go, nice and dry again. So I'm just going to finish off these sections, do a bit of speed painting, and then when it's dry I'll be able to iron this and take it over to my machine to start some quilting. So we're going to let that dry and then iron it, and you won't believe the difference it makes when we get rid of all these wrinkles and get rid of the friction pen. And then we have a few options of whether we outline this with a very fine Sharpie marker, or we take it straight to the sewing machine and quilt into it and make it quite a delicate design, perhaps using even just white thread on this piece to keep the whole thing really soft. Now we're going to wait for it to dry, so I'm going to go and have a break and come back to you very soon. Hello and welcome back. We're looking at our little Blue Wren design that's completely dry now, but you can see how the areas that haven't been painted are quite wrinkly. So this is where I'll use a little bit of spritz. But first off, I'm just going to iron this and show you that the friction pen does come away. So I've got my iron on the hottest cotton setting, which is fine. And you can see that friction pen is gone. Already that looks quite amazing. I'm now going to spray this, and that'll sink in and shrink those areas to be like the rest. Okay, that is magic. So let's see what happens when I go over the edges, recreating the original design. So this is where you can refer back to your original block design if you need to, and this is where I'm planning on stitching. And this doesn't have to be perfect. Again, this is hand drawn, hand painted. It wants to look as if it's been hand done. hope you've enjoyed our little INKtense pencil class with our Blue Wren. You've learned a lot about how to use the right fabric, freeing yourself up with those pencils, not being so concerned about the whole aloe vera or medium or gels, etc. Letting the pencils work their magic and creating such a cute little Blue Wren as a lovely little wall hanging or as the beginning of a much larger quilt. So thanks very much for joining me. Come and see other classes at helengodden.com. I've got my INKtense pencils there in sets of 12, 24 or 36. I even sell this calico. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much. See you later from helengodden.com. Bye. Tweet, tweet.